Bracket Science. I'm Brandon Jadich. I thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We're officially 4 weeks away from March Madness, so we're officially doing a catch-up show just like we did when there was 8 weeks left 2 months to go. Now there's only 1 month to go. Very exciting. We're going to discuss everything you need to know for March Madness in today's show. This will include some of the basics, some in-depth metrics, stuff like that. This will include some of the best teams. Who are the best teams in the nation right now? There's 3 of them that are separating themselves. We'll talk about that. This might have a big implication on who you take as a national champion when you have to fill out your bracket. Don't panic just yet. We'll talk about some of the odds for who's the favorites to win it all as of right now. They had one reveal already of the top 16 seeds. The bracket does it, or the bracket committee does it every single year. They release the top 16 seeds, and 8 of them have already lost. So we're going to talk about what these top 16 seeds are, how they've changed. We'll talk a little bit about our bracketology, what the bracket might look like here in 4 weeks. We'll talk about how last year's Elite Eight, some of the teams that you are familiar with, made deep runs last year, how they're faring this year so far. Hint, hint, they are not very good for some of them. Along with, we'll talk about some of the favorite blue blood programs that you are always picking to win or to make a Final Four run, such as UCLA and Kentucky. We'll also finally talk about some of the mid-major teams like the St. Peter's, the Florida Gulf Coast, teams who are looking to make a run. And then finally, we'll talk about how things stand right now, just like some of the conference outlooks, where some of your teams might be seated right now if the field of 68 were to be released today. While you're here, we really appreciate it. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, whether that's on YouTube or video or audio on Spotify or Apple. Give us a like, a review. We really, really appreciate it. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Bracket Science 2S's. We post on there daily, every single day. Results, bracketology, games to watch, some of the conference outlooks, some of the locks, some of the knots, some bubble watch. Post everything on there, continuing to grow. We appreciate everyone. Love hearing everyone's comments on there. Hopefully this helps out to some of you new college hoops people this year. Football season's officially over. It is college basketball time. Hopefully this will give you a base on what has happened so far in the college basketball year. Let's dive right into it. Let's start with who some of the best teams in the nation are. We're going to go off of the current top 10 in the AP poll. The number 1 team in the AP poll right now is UConn. Yes, the same UConn team that won last year. Dan Hurley has done an incredible job. UConn is currently 24-3, 14-2 in the Big East. They are 3rd at KenPom. For those who do not know what KenPom is, KenPom rates teams based on efficiency. It is a big tool in determining who will be the next big thing, I guess, in college basketball. Next big team, make a championship run. Their numbers always add up very well with teams that are making deep runs in March Madness. They do offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency. They throw in some luck in there. It really does a good job of rating who the best teams in the nation are. UConn is currently 3rd at KenPom. They're 4th in the net, which we know the committee uses a ton on. They're 9-3 in Quadrant 1. For those who don't know what Quadrant 1 wins are, it's a basis of the net where if you beat a certain ranked team at home, beat a certain ranked team in neutral site, and beat a certain ranked team on the road, it varies between Quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. Quadrant 1 is the best teams you will play, and they are 9-3 in Quadrant 1, which means they have 0 losses outside of Quadrant 1, which is incredible. Quadrant 2 is still very good teams, so impressive job there by UConn. Their losses this year have come at Kansas. Not a bad loss at all. Everyone loses at Allen Fieldhouse. They lost at Seton Hall, at Creighton. Not bad. They just lost to Creighton last night, actually. They do have wins over Marquette, North Carolina, Texas, Gonzaga, Creighton, all expected to be tournament teams. They're the most balanced team in the nation. Dan Hurley may be the best coach in the nation. They've done a great job. So the 3 teams we're going to have a focus on, starting with UConn. Of course, we had to mention the defending national champion, how impressive it is that they're doing such a great job this year again. The 3 teams we're going to talk about the most are UConn, Houston, and Arizona. All 3 teams very close to the top. The number 2 ranked team in the AP poll right now is Houston. Houston is 23-3. UConn, I should mention, at 24-3, is the only team in the nation with 24 wins. They have the most wins out of anyone. Houston, right behind them at 23-3. 10-3 in the Big 12, which is the best conference in basketball, for those who do not know. They are 1st at KenPom. They have the best defense in the nation, 1st in defensive efficiency. They got a guy by the name of Jamal Shed, who everyone should get to know. He is an incredible basketball player. They're first in the net as well. They're 9-3 in quadrant one, 0 losses outside of quadrant one. Exact same numbers as UConn. They do have losses at Kansas, just like UConn, Iowa State, and at TCU. They do have wins over Iowa State. Split that series. They have a win over Texas, Dayton, Texas Tech, and BYU. As mentioned, they have the best defense in the nation. A lot of this reason is because of Jamal Shead. Everyone should get to know Jamal Shead. He is an outstanding human being. Their coach, Kelvin Sampson, done a great job. He speaks nothing but great words on Jamal Shead. If you remember that video that went viral a couple years ago, it was a tough Houston loss. And there was a Houston player, not going to mention his name. He knocked over, it was kind of throwing a little bit of a fit after a loss, knocked over the trash can. And the video went viral of the one Houston student who stayed back. He was upset after the loss, obviously, but picked up that trash just on a neutral floor. Wasn't his building, and he did it. And that man turned out to be Jamal Shead, who is a front runner for first team All-American as of right now. He's incredible defensively. He's incredible offensively. This Houston team is incredible all the way around. Let's move on. The other team we got to mention, third in the AP poll, also 23-3, is Purdue. Purdue, the team who lost to Fairleigh Dickinson last year. Yes, they are back. Yes, they are most likely going to be a 1 seed again. They were the number 1 overall seed when the top 16 was revealed. They're 12-3 in the Big Ten, second at KenPom, and second in the net, 9-3 in quadrant 1, 0 losses outside of quadrant 1, just like Houston and UConn. They have the worst losses out of the 3, which is what I will say about them. They have losses at Ohio State, at Nebraska, and at Northwestern. Not the worst losses, not horrible, but they're quadrant 1 losses, but they're the worst out of the 3. But they have the best wins out of the 3 as well. Wins over Tennessee, Marquette, Arizona, Alabama, Wisconsin, Gonzaga, Illinois, all tournament teams. Tennessee and Marquette, both in the 2 seed category from the top 16 reveal. Arizona, a 1 seed, the 4th 1 seed. Alabama, 3 seed. Wisconsin, the 4 seed. Illinois, 4 seed. They have beaten all of these teams who were released as the top 16 teams in the nation. They have the best wins. They have the best resume. They have the most quadrant 2 wins out of these 3 teams. They would be the number 1 overall seed as of right now. But they are currently 3rd in the AP poll. So let's talk about some other teams that are sort of in tier 2 as of right now that you should know. The number 4 team in the AP poll is Arizona. Arizona coming off that loss last year at Princeton in the first round. Remember that one. They are currently 20-5, 11-3 in the Pac-12, which is good for first. They're 4th at KenPom, 3rd in the net. They are above UConn in the net, but that is the only thing that the top 3 teams are outside of any one of these other teams. 3rd in the net, 7-1 in quadrant 1. They do have 1 quadrant 2 loss and 1 quadrant 3 loss. They have a loss at Stanford, at Washington State, at Oregon State. Then they do have neutral site losses to Purdue and FAU, Florida Atlantic, that Magic team last year. Do have wins at Duke. They beat Michigan State, Alabama, Wisconsin, Utah. They beat Colorado twice, who was supposed to be the second best team in the Pac-12 this year, and they beat them by 1,000,000 both times. Arizona, team to watch out for, very balanced offensively and defensively. They got Caleb Love, the transfer from North Carolina. I'm sure you remember. He is their leading scorer as of right now. Interesting stuff going on in Arizona, and Tommy Lloyd's off to a great start in his coaching career. Moving on, Tennessee, 5th in the AP poll. They're 20-6 overall, 10-3 in the SEC, which is actually 2nd behind Alabama. We'll briefly mention Alabama. They're currently 13th in the AP poll. Alabama they have the best offense in the nation right now, even without Brandon Miller. They only returned 3 teams. You may remember they were the number 1 overall seed last year in March Madness, but they did get beat by San Diego State, who ended up being the national runner-up. But Alabama, they're off to a great start. They're actually playing right now as we record, so bear that in mind. They're playing at home against Florida. Tennessee, 7th at KenPom, 6th in the net. They are 5-5 in quadrant 1. They suffered a lot of early losses, specifically in the Maui Invitational. They only have 1 quadrant 2 loss, though no quadrant 3 or quadrant 4 losses. So nothing really to hurt their resume. Their losses came to Purdue, Kansas, and UNC. They lost also at Mississippi State and Texas A&M at those places. And then they did lose at home to South Carolina. Those are their 6 losses. They have key wins over Wisconsin, Illinois, Florida, Alabama, and Kentucky. Moving on, a team you may not have expected to be here if you're new to college basketball this year, Iowa State. Iowa State 6th in the AP poll right now, 9-4 in the Big 12, 20-6 overall. They are 2nd in the Big 12 behind Houston, who we already talked about. They're 8th at KenPom, 8th in the net, 6-5 in Quadrant 1 with only one Quadrant 2 loss. Their losses came earlier in the year where they struggled a little bit. They lost on a neutral to Virginia Tech and Texas A&M. Then in conference play, they have lost at Oklahoma, at Baylor, at BYU, and at Houston. Now, they do have wins over the two powerhouses in the Big 12, which is Houston and Kansas. Then they did beat TCU twice. They beat Texas and Texas Tech. Good start for Iowa State. One of the best defensive teams in the nation, just like Houston in their own conference. Moving on, Marquette. Marquette is 19-6 overall. They're 10-4 in the Big East. They are in second, only behind UConn. Their metrics are not as good as some of the other schools. They're 14th at KenPom, 14th in the net, 6-5 in Quadrant 1 though, just like Iowa State with one Quadrant 2 loss. They lost on a neutral site to Purdue in the Maui Invitational Championship. They lost at home to Butler, which is a little questionable. They lost at Providence, at Seton Hall, at Wisconsin, and then they did just lose at UConn by 28, just a blowout there. They do have wins over Kansas, Illinois, Creighton, and they did beat Villanova twice, so they have a very solid resume going forward. Let's move on to another blue blood program, Duke, who is 20-5 overall, 11-3 in the ACC. They're second behind just North Carolina in the ACC. Very fun to see North Carolina and Duke battling it out for an ACC title. They're currently 12th at KenPom, 16th in the net. They are 6-2 in Quadrant 1, which is spectacular. The problem is they are 1-2 in Quadrant 2. They do have one Quadrant 3 loss, which is at Georgia Tech, which is a rough one. They do have losses at home to Arizona and Pitt, and they did lose at UNC in that rivalry game. They lost at Arkansas, and then that Georgia Tech game that we mentioned. They do have key wins over Michigan State, Baylor, and Clemson, but that is about it for Duke's resume. Moving on, another blue blood program. We're going to talk about a lot of them today. Kansas, 20-6 overall. They're 8-5 in the Big 12. Very unusual for Kansas, which is tied for third in the conference. We'd already talked about Iowa State and Houston. They are behind them. They're 16th at KenPom, 17th in the net, 6-4 Quadrant 1. They do have a Quadrant 2 loss and one Quadrant 3 loss. They lost on a neutral to Marquette in the Maui Invitational. Then they lost at Iowa State, at UCF, at West Virginia, at Kansas State, and at Texas Tech. So you can see they kind of struggle on the road a little bit here. They do not get beat at Allen Fieldhouse. They're still undefeated this year at Allen Fieldhouse. They do have a lot of really good wins, though. They beat Kentucky earlier in the year in the CBS, the Champions Classic. It is the State Farm Classic, They did beat Tennessee in Maui, and then they beat UConn and Houston, which are huge wins carrying their resume. They also beat Baylor and Oklahoma twice. North Carolina, just blue blood to blue blood. 20-6 overall as of right now, 12-3 in the ACC, which is good for first. North Carolina currently 10th in the AP poll and 10th at KenPom, 10th in the net, 6-4 in Quadrant 1. One Quadrant 2 loss and one Quadrant 3 loss. That Quadrant 3 loss, just like Duke, to Georgia Tech, The losses came to Villanova, UConn, Kentucky, all on neutral sites. Then they lost at Georgia Tech, and then they did lose to Syracuse at Syracuse, and then they lost at home to Clemson. Not a bad loss on their resume outside of the Georgia Tech one. Syracuse still very solid, and even a home loss to Clemson. Clemson was in make it or break it territory there. Do have big wins over Tennessee, Duke, Clemson earlier in the year, and Oklahoma. So that's the top 10 in the AP poll right there. Hopefully that gives you a little basis of who you might be taking based on some of their quadrant and their resume on who you might take to win it all. Let's see what the books have to win it all right now. This is via FanDuel right now. The favorite to win the national championship is UConn by a large margin, even going back-to-back. No team has gone back-to-back since Florida in the late 2000s. UConn is currently plus 500, a heavy favorite. In second is Purdue at plus 800 and Houston at plus 900. They've separated themselves. Then the fourth number one seed that we talked about is Arizona at plus 1100. So they are right there as well. Tennessee up next, fifth at plus 1400. Then North Carolina, Alabama, Iowa State all plus 2000. So those are some of the favorites via the books. This one's via FanDuel Sportsbook. Let's move on. Let's talk about the top 16 reveal that we've hinted at a little bit. Starting with the ones we mentioned, it was Purdue, then UConn, Houston, Arizona. Those were the top four. It was unanimous, the top four, the first time it's ever been like that. Every voter had that for inside the committee room. The twos currently were North Carolina, Tennessee, Marquette, and Kansas. Kansas kind of shocked some people squeezing in there, but they do have wins over UConn. They do have a win over Houston. I mean, they're two of the top three teams undoubtedly in the nation. They have wins over both of them. Threes are Alabama, Baylor, Iowa State, and Duke. Talked about a few of these teams already in the AP reveal. Fours were Auburn, San Diego State, Illinois, and Wisconsin. So interesting stuff for the fours. There are a couple teams left out. Notably, were Creighton and Dayton and Clemson. They're on the 5 line as of now. Even though a couple teams just keep losing. Creighton will move in after we mentioned they just beat UConn. So we're going to talk about some of that a little bit later in our bracketology segment. But we noted in the introduction that half of these teams have already actually lost. Purdue lost at Ohio State. Marquette lost at UConn. Auburn got beat. Iowa State got beat. UConn got beat. San Diego State got beat. Wisconsin got beat. Baylor got beat. 8 of these teams already taken a fall, so this will definitely shift things around. The 1 seeds are kind of in there for good as of right now, especially Purdue, UConn, and Houston. Arizona might fluctuate a little bit. They're in the Pac-12, which is a weak conference right now, so we'll see what that means going forward. But let's talk about the last year's Elite 8, the teams that you think might have returned a lot of people and might have a good chance. We already talked about UConn. We're not going to talk about UConn anymore. They're incredible. They're great. Dan Hurley is incredible. Let's talk about San Diego State, the team that was a national runner-up last year. We mentioned they were a 4 seed in the first reveal. They did just lose at Utah State. That is the game that they lost. So they are currently probably on the 5 line as of now, maybe still hanging around the 4 line. I think we still have them as a 4 seed as of right now. But they are 20-7 overall. They're second in the Mountain West, strictly because of Utah State. Utah State, that loss, that moved them down to second, and Utah State is in first. They have a guy by the name of Jaden Ledee. Might not remember him from last year. He wasn't that important, but he has taken a huge step this year, averaging about 20 points per game. He's been going off, big body down low, transfer from Ohio State. He's done a great job for San Diego State. They are in the conversation yet again. They made it to the championship as a 5 seed last year. Right now we have them as a 4 seed, even a little better. So we'll see how they do going forward. Now we mentioned Creighton and their big win over UConn. They're currently 20-7 in the Big East Conference overall. In the Big East, they are in 3rd place behind Marquette and UConn. We have them as a 3 seed after beating UConn last night. They have Baylor Shireman returning. You might remember him. He is a double-double machine, even a triple-double machine. Still have Trey Alexander, Ryan Kalkbrenner. They got a guy by the name of Stephen Ashworth, who is he's been their point guard, and he has played great as of late, especially against UConn. So let's talk a little bit about Florida Atlantic. The Cinderella team last year made it to the Final Four, lost in the Final Four just because of a Lamont Butler buzzer beater from San Diego State. They are 20-6 overall record, not as good as last year. Currently 3rd in the American Athletic Conference. That is where they moved to this year. Still are good for an at-large bid. They did beat Arizona, which is kind of carrying their resume. We currently have them as an 8 seed. They've suffered some really questionable losses, though. They lost to Bryant earlier in the year. They lost to Florida Gulf Coast, Charlotte, UAB, USF. So a couple questionable losses there in conference play, especially that Florida Gulf Coast one is really rough. But they beat enough good teams in the non-con to still be in the tournament for us as of now as an 8 seed. Kansas State, remember Kansas State run last year. They were projected last in the Big 12 last year and made it all the way to the Elite 8. Now, unfortunately, they did lose Marquise Noel. They lost Keontae Johnson. They lost Naquan Tomlin. Naquan Tomlin currently at Memphis. We'll talk about them in a little bit here. Kansas State currently 15-11 overall, 5-8 in the Big 12. They're probably not going to make the tournament this year. They did beat Kansas at home, but they've lost something like 6 of 7 or 7 of 8. Can't remember the exact number, but kind of a rough year for Jerome Tang's squad. Going to have to rebuild there. They do have some dudes on their team, but not a great year for Kansas State. Now Miami, speaking of not great years, they have been extremely disappointing this year. They're currently playing Duke right now. I just got to mention they're getting just waxed. Now they still have Wooga Poplar, Norchad O'Meara, Nigel Pack, all back from last year's Final Four run. They did lose Jordan Miller and Isaiah Wong, But they're currently 15-11. This team should be good on paper. They're 6-9 in the ACC. They're not going to be in March, and they're not going to get an at-large bid unless they were to. The only way they'll get in is if they win the ACC tournament, and I just don't see it from this team, unfortunately. They just haven't put all the pieces together. Jim Larenega's frustrated. Not a great year for Miami. Let's talk about Texas. They're 17-9, 6-7 in the Big 12. They lost Marcus Carr. Dylan Dessou had been injured for a while, but remember they did bring in Max Abesmith from Oral Roberts legend. They've been pretty disappointing though. They got a lot of talent on this roster. They're still comfortably in as of right now. We also have them as an 8 seed right now. So we'll see. We'll see how Rodney Terry does with this team after taking them to a Big 12 championship title last year and then all the way to the Elite Eight where they honestly should have beat Miami but did not. Let's move on to Gonzaga. Gonzaga 20-6 this year. You might think that's good. It's been a disappointing season for them. They're 10-2 in the WCC West Coast Conference. They're behind St. Mary's, who is 13-0 in conference. They lost Drew Timme and Jalen Strother. They do have Anton Watson, who is very good. They brought in Ryan Nemhard. They've just been disappointing because they only have one quad one win, which they just got, which was at Kentucky. Now this, yes, it's a great win. They played very well, but it was kind of during Kentucky's recent struggles, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Luckily for Gonzaga, the bubble teams just keep losing. They keep losing and just digging themselves holes, and Gonzaga is just kind of beating teams they should beat in the WCC, moving them up. Their metrics are really good. They're 19th at KenPom, 23rd in the net. If they get in, so your resume gets you in, and then your metrics kind of seed you. It's kind of more of that it's kind of figured out like that. So if they get in, don't expect them to be an 11 or 12 seed. They'll probably be between an 8 and 10 seed. We currently have them as a 10 seed. I thought there was no chance that this team was going to get in, but the bubble just keeps eating itself alive, and we have them in the tournament as of right now. So that's all of the Elite 8 teams there. Next, we're going to get into some mid-major sleepers. But first, a quick ad from Amazon. The weather's getting warm. It means it's time for golf season. It's almost time. Don't sell out on what golf ball you play this year. Play the Pro V1 from Titleist or the Pro V1X. It is the best golf ball. Why go fight traffic and crowds when you can have Pro V1s ordered right to your house? Now order golf balls immediately through Amazon. Get it delivered right to your door. Amazon is the leader in delivery service. Stay on your couch, use the link, go golfing, use the link in the description to order Pro V1s directly to your door. Amazon. Check the link in the description for great deals. All right, let's talk about some mid-major sleepers. We always love a Cinderella story. Now, the first team might not really be a sleeper because we have them as a 5 seed right now. They've been that good, and it is Dayton out of the A10. Dayton is 21-4 and 11-2 in the A10. They're beating the teams they're supposed to beat. They're losing some questionable ones, but 21-4, they're good enough. The A10 is a good conference. It's better than you think. I think it's currently ranked 8th in the KenPom rankings. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But they got a guy by the name of Deron Holmes who may be an All-American. Now, when I say All-American, that's All-American first team, All-American second team, All-American third team. He's good enough. He will be on one of these lists. I'm fully convinced. He is an absolute dude down low. He's the difference maker for this team. We'll see how they do come March. They're a team to look out for from the A10. They will get an at-large bid. St. Mary's. We mentioned them a little bit already in their undefeated record. We currently have them as a 7 seed right now out of the WCC. Now, they started off the year ranked in the AP poll, and we're like, yes, this is going to be the team to beat, even with Gonzaga, because Gonzaga lost Timme and Strother. But then St. Mary's started off the year 3-5, and we just kind of wrote them off. They've now won 18 of 19. 13-0 in the West Coast Conference. They're the only team in all of college basketball who's still undefeated in conference play. They got the longest winning streak in the nation since UConn lost last night to Creighton. It now belongs to St. Mary's. Good stuff there. This is not a team you want to face come March. They might even continue to just climb. I could see them getting as high as a 5 or 6 seed. We already talked about Florida Atlantic in their Final Four run last year. Now, I didn't mention that they did bring back 12 out of 13 guys from that run last year. So they have the pieces. I know they haven't played as well, but watch out for them. They might turn it on come March. Now let's get into double-digit seeds because this is what we want to talk about. Grand Canyon is the first one we're going to mention. We currently have them as an 11 seed. They're out of the WAC. The WAC, if you haven't heard that one. They beat San Diego State earlier in the year, and they kind of put the world on notice by beating them. Now, it was at Grand Canyon, electric environment. They're kind of just bought in. teams bought in, their fan base is bought into this year, and it is paying off. They're one of only 5 teams in the nation to reach 23 wins so far. They're very athletic, they're long, they're quick. They got the components to make a little bit of a run in March. Now we mentioned there's been 5 teams to reach 23 wins. We already talked about UConn, we talked about Purdue, we talked about Houston, now we've talked about Grand Canyon. The other team is McNeese, Will Wade's squad. Remember Will Wade from LSU? He's at McNeese now. They're out of the Southland Conference. We currently have them as a 12 seed. They're the 5th team to reach this 23 win total. Now Will Wade was suspended for the first 10 games, but they just win. They just keep winning. This is a team that's going to be a heavy pick as a 12 seed to beat a 5 seed. Now we got to talk about out of the Missouri Valley Conference, Drake or Indiana State. They're both fighting for at-large bids and of course for the automatic bid out of the Missouri Valley. Expect them to be anywhere between an 11 and 12 seed. They definitely won't fall lower than a 12 seed. Indiana State actually snuck into the AP poll, and they were looking great for an at-large bid, but then they lost 2 horrible games in a row. Now, Drake and Indiana State did split the series between the two. They both have some firepower. I'm sure everyone's seen the picture of Robbie Avila from Indiana State. Call him College Jokic. He's a big guy, glasses, goggles, can dish the rock, big rebounder, great player. They got some firepower on Indiana State. And then Tucker DeVries, the son of Coach DeVries from Drake, he is an outstanding player for Drake. 2 teams to keep an eye on there. Moving on, App State or James Madison, another one of those. Either team that gets in could really make some noise. They'll probably be a 12 seed if either team gets in. Maybe even both. James Madison kind of hovering around that at large. I doubt it, but they're close. They're out of the Sun Belt Conference, I may add. James Madison did put the world on notice earlier in the year when they won at Michigan State in their first game. Michigan State was 4th in the preseason AP poll, and they lost to James Madison at Michigan State. Crazy win there. They were in the AP poll for a while. They were steady in there. They kept winning games. They were one of the last undefeated teams. Then App State has kind of taken charge. They swept the series this year. They won at James Madison and at home. App State also beat Auburn earlier in the year. This game was at home. It was kind of a weird scheduling thing there by Bruce Pearl to go at App State, but it obviously made them better, and it made App State better as well. So watch out for App State or James Madison. Let's talk about some higher seeds you might want to know. Akron. We currently have them as a 13 seed out of the MAC. It's going to be Akron or Toledo, I'm fully convinced, winning that conference tournament. Akron returned almost all of their players from an already great team last year. They were supposed to win the conference tournament last year. They did get beat by Kent State, and then Kent State ended up losing to Indiana, I think it was. But Akron returned a bunch of the players. They have a guy named Ali, who is an absolute stud down low. They got length, they got size, they got athleticism. Akron's a team I would not want to face. They actually just matched up with James Madison. James Madison actually beat them. It was at James Madison, so a little leverage there. But Akron, a team I wouldn't want to face in March. Now let's talk about Samford. Samford has put the world on notice because of how fire-powered their offense is. They're out of the SoCon, the Southern Conference. They are currently a 13 seed in our bracketology. Now, let's talk about Samford's start to the season. They start off the season with a game at Purdue, who we talked a lot about. They got beat by 53 at Purdue. Their next game, they lost at VCU by 10. Yes, VCU is a great program. After that, they won 17 games in a row. So they really put the world on notice there. They were one of the first teams to reach 17 wins. Then they did just recently lose to Furman and Mercer. But this offense, I mean, if they get hot, they've got some serious firepower, a little bit like Furman last year. We'll see how they do. I would currently have them as a 13 seed. Now, bear in mind, some of these seed lines might change because, say, Indiana State or Drake doesn't get in. Say Belmont goes out and wins that conference tournament. That would probably bump a Samford up to a 12 seed, or even if Akron were to pull things through, you never know. Obviously, all of these teams aren't going to be in March, so bear in mind that with some of the seed line. Let's move into the Ivy League. Ivy League always has competition in March. Yale, Princeton, and Cornell are all battling. They will probably be anywhere between, if Princeton wins the conference tournament, they might be an 11 seed, but probably a 12 to 13 seed. As mentioned, teams do not want to play the Ivy League no matter what it is. We remember what Princeton did last year. They made the made the Sweet 16 last year, and they were the darling early this year. They were almost ranked for a little bit. They were beating teams left and right. Yale and Cornell are currently atop the standings, though, but Princeton did just beat Yale the other day. This game was at Princeton. So this race is going to be interesting to see. A lot of teams, obviously all smart kids. They know how to win. They know how to play basketball. Keep in mind the Ivy League come March. Now, as a 14 seed, we'll talk about one 14 seed, one 15 seed. If a 16 seed wins, call me out on it. I mean, it's happened twice, so it's just twice ever, so it's just not really worth talking about. Let's talk about the first 14 seed that might have a chance of sneaking past picking up a big upset. It's UNC Wilmington out of the Coastal Athletic Conference. They won at Kentucky earlier in the year. That is a huge win at Rupp Arena to pick up UNCW has been around for a while, and this was just their defining win for their season, and it just kind of got them rolling. They are in a competitive conference in the CAA with Charleston, Drexel. They're both good. They swept Charleston this year, who was a great team. They were my preseason pick to win it all, and they split with Drexel. They got firepower on offense. They are incredibly fast. They matched up with Kentucky well. They scored a ton of points. UNCW, watch out for them come March. The 15 seed we're going to talk about, High Point. High Point out of the Big South. They're 22-6. Now, earlier in the year, it's kind of just one of those, you want to see how they match up with some of the power conferences. They played at Georgia and lost to them by 8. Georgia has been good this year. Mike White's squad has been a little better. They got a competitive conference as well. The Big South is better than you may think it is. They have Longwood, Winthrop, UNC Asheville. But High Point has separated themselves as the best team. They're athletic. They are incredibly fast. They are kind of like that UMBC team. Now you know there's going to be some of those 15 seeds that are picked, just like Princeton was last year. High Point would probably be my choice as of right now. Now they might end up being a 14 seed as well because this team is that good. But as of right now, net ranking wise, they'll be a 15 seed. That's it for our mid-majors that you want to look out for. Now let's go straight from mid-majors all the way to the top to some of the teams that you always expect to be right in the conversation come March. Let's do our blue blood check-in. Now we already talked about Duke, North Carolina, UConn, Kansas. But let's talk about Kentucky and UCLA. Those are going to be the only two teams we talk about. And let's definitely talk about Kentucky because they are probably the most interesting team in college basketball this year. Now they're 18-7. They're 8-4 in the SEC. They're a good team. We have them as a 5 seed right now. They have probably the most talented roster in college basketball, which you kind of come to expect. Now, if you remember Antonio Reeves, he is the veteran of the squad. He is their leading scorer. He's an absolute stud. They have a guy named Reed Shepard. He started off the year, he was like in the 30s or 40s in the recruiting class. Small little white guy, and he just has risen above and above, just climbing draft boards. Not what you'd expect to be just an absolute stud, but that's exactly what he is. He's in the top 15 of just about every draft board that you will find. Now he's got a counterpart by the name of Rob Dillingham, who is in the top 5 of just about every draft board you'll know. He comes off the bench, kind of plays the Devin Booker role, and he is an absolute stud scorer. He is one of the most gifted scorers I've seen in my years of watching college basketball. I also got a guy named Justin Edwards, who was supposed to be a top 5 pick. He's kind of fallen off. He hasn't had a great year. He's in the second round of a lot of mock drafts as of now. But just think of all this talent that they have. I fully believe Antonio Reeves will be in the NBA. Reed Shepard, Rob Dillingham, and Justin Edwards will definitely be in the NBA. You got a 7-footer by the name of Zvonimir Ivisic. He just got eligible a little bit ago, made some noise early, but just hasn't been able to really play defense at an SEC level. Same goes with Aaron Bradshaw. He got eligible late in the year and is in the exact same boat as Ivisic too. Great player, a lot of length, a lot of skill, just not quite defensively good enough. So they got 6 guys who will probably be in the NBA. They have so much talent, put the world on notice. Early in the year, they beat Miami at home by 22. And Miami was in the top 10 then. We talked about Miami. They're not good anymore. So this win kind of went down the drain. Then they lost that game to UNC Wilmington, which we talked about. This game was at Rupp, at home. Then they beat North Carolina and Florida and just kept climbing, got into the top 10 comfortably. Then they lost to Florida. This was at Kentucky, though. They won at Florida, yet lost at home to Florida. Then they lost to Tennessee. Then they lost to Gonzaga. These are all 3 games that were played at Rupp. Three home games in a row that they lost. created a lot of controversy because this team is so talented. They were one of the favorites to win the national title. And it was because a lot of the controversy came from Coach Cal not playing Rob Dillingham, who I mentioned will be a top 5 draft pick most likely. It's just been an interesting season. He took a lot of criticism there. They played no defense. That was the problem for this Kentucky team. The first 23 games, they played no defense. But I will give them credit. The last 2 games, they've been incredible. They're actually 4th at Torvik, which is another efficiency rating. They were 4th in defensive efficiency the last 2 games. And they beat Ole Miss, and then they went and beat Auburn at Auburn. They were 10-point underdogs in that game, I may add. So they're currently, for the entire season, 8th in the country in offense at KenPom, 82nd in defensive efficiency at KenPom. Very interesting, this Kentucky team. They have a high ceiling, but they got to play some defense that you could see them. I don't think I see them as a national champion right now, as a national title contender right now, I should say. But with that offensive firepower, the sky's the limit for this team. Moving on, UCLA. UCLA, they're another program we've talked a ton about on here. They started off the year 6-10. 6-10 for UCLA. That 10th loss came at Utah, where they got beat by 46. They got beat 90-44. They got doubled up by Utah. Mick Cronin, their head coach, he wasn't showing up to press conferences. He was bad-mouthing UCLA's NIL deals, some of their players. So you think this season was just gone. Now they've won 8 of 10 in the Pac-12. The losses being at Arizona and then against Utah again, who are maybe the 2 best teams in the Pac-12 other than Washington State, who we'll talk about here in a second. They're currently 4th in the Pac-12 after starting off 6-10 and getting beat by Utah by 46. So Mick Cronin, yes, he's had some questionable decisions this year, but he's done an outstanding job to get this team at least back on track a little bit. They got something to play for. They're playing as well as just about anyone in the Pac-12 right now. They could make a little run in the Pac-12 tournament and maybe sneak into the championship game and steal one from Arizona and somehow end up in March, but we'll see. That's a long way to go. So we talked a little bit about Mick Cronin. He is not on the hot seat, but there are a lot of coaches on the hot seat. Let's talk a little bit about that. Chris Holtmann from Ohio State, he already got fired. We've talked about that. We talked about that on one of our most recent podcasts. I actually went to that game where Jake Diebler is now their interim head coach, and I went and they beat Purdue. It was very incredible. And then Tony Stubblefield was also fired from DePaul, so those are 2 open positions. Let's talk about some coaches that have not been fired yet that are on the hot seat. If you're into the coaches, here's your breakdown. Starting with Juwan Howard at Michigan. Michigan, a great basketball school, obviously a great football school defending national championship. But they're 8-18. They're last in the Big Ten, 3-12 in the Big Ten. Juwan Howard had an altercation with their strength coach. It's a disaster of a year for Michigan. I mean, 8-18 for such a valued program like that. They got their point guard, their best player is named Doug McDaniel, and Juwan Howard just went out and suspended him for 6 games. And I don't mean just 6 games back to back to back like you would think. Only 6 road games. They never really disclosed about what was going on there. It's just a weird season. Juwan Howard, I don't expect him to be Michigan's head coach next year. Staying in the Big Ten, Mike Woodson at Indiana. Indiana is 14-11. They have one of the most historic programs in college basketball. You think of Indiana, you think of the Hoosiers, you think basketball. They're not going to be in the NCAA tournament this year, and their roster is incredible. They have a very talented roster. They got Khalil Ware, transfer from Oregon, one of the highest rated transfers this season. They got a bunch of talent, and Mackenzie Mbako is a 5-star, and they're just bad. They're not beating teams. Now, Dusty May, who is the coach at FAU, took them to the Final Four last year and had them ranked for a while this year. Still a good year for FAU this year. Going to be in March. He has ties to Indiana, and he's fully expected to be the coach at Indiana next year. I would think as long as they move on from Mike Woodson, he's on the hot seat. I personally believe he should be fired and Dusty May should be brought in, but we'll see how they do going forward. But his seat is definitely warm. Now, the one that I fully expect will not be there next year, Kenny Payne at Louisville. Kenny Payne has just had a rough career at Louisville so far. They're 8-18 this year, which is improvement from last year. 3-12 in the ACC, also improvement from last year. It's just been an embarrassing year. embarrassing couple years under Kenny Payne. Such a historic program. I mean, they were winning national championships with Russ Smith just about 10 years ago. Not enough money at Louisville, though, is what it seems. They can't afford to buy out Kenny Payne and then go pay someone else, so maybe it will be Kenny Payne, but it's not going well. Now, we said we'd talk about Memphis. Memphis had one of the most interesting seasons this year, and that brings up Penny Hardaway being on the hot seat. Now, Memphis was rolling. They got all the way up to 10th in the AP poll and looking like a title contender. Not just the AAC title contender, but an actual national championship contender. Now, they're not going to be in March, and they might not even make the NIT. They are bad. They've lost 6 of 9 games in the American Athletic Conference. Not a very talented conference. It's just been ugly stuff for Penny Hardaway. 6 of 9 losses. He's on the hot seat. They're 18-8 still, but yeah, he's on the hot seat. Now, we mentioned Rodney Terry's name early. He might be on the hot seat at Texas just because of a little bit of a disappointing year for all the talent that they had. Now, I don't think they're going to move just after one bad year, move in another direction. As I said, they made the Elite Eight last year, won the Big 12 tournament last year. They're kind of a bubble team this year, but I do think that they're going to end up in. It's just some of the non-basketball issues that have come up, some of the horns down stuff. It's just kind of making Texas like a hated program all throughout the nation. If you haven't heard, just controversy on whether horns down is offensive or not, and a lot of student sections just it's been ugly. And then he had a weird celebration when they beat Baylor, where he's like, he's been telling everyone to act like you've been here before, and just went crazy when they beat one. It's just not a good look for the Texas program right now. But I don't think they're going to move on from him. But he better figure it out next year, or I fully expect him to be gone. Now, Kyle Neptune at Villanova. They're currently 15-11. They had lost 5 in a row in conference play. Were really spiraling. Now they've won 4 of 5. He's kind of redeemed himself. But it's still just not up to Villanova expectations. I mean, they were winning national championships many years, and he kind of got thrown into a tough spot with Jay Wright just retiring out of the blue. But yeah, he's not living up to Villanova expectations. 15-11. They're on the bubble right now. They're actually one of our first 4 teams. And the final team, or the final man on the bubble seat we're going to talk about is Bobby Hurley at Arizona State. Now, they did make the NCAA tournament last year. Remember, they were in a playing game. But they're currently 13-13 this year. I mean, Arizona State's a good school. They got a lot of NIL money, and 13-13, 122nd at Ken Pom. They've lost 8 of 11. Their last game they played at Arizona and got beat by 45. My prediction, honestly, I think Bobby Hurley's going to end up at DePaul next year is kind of what I'm expecting. I think Arizona State and him just kind of mutually go their own ways, and I think he ends up at DePaul. That's just kind of how I feel some things are leaning. All right, so enough about all this talk about some of the players, some of the teams, some of the coaches. Let's talk about just some of the dates that you need to know come March Madness. Now, Selection Sunday is on March 17th, so mark your calendars, get your calendars out, put them in your phone because you're going to want to call off work for these days. Selection Sunday, March 17th. The first 4 is March 19th and 20th. These games take place in Dayton, Ohio. First round, March 21st and 22nd, with the second round following March 23rd and 24th. Now, the Sweet 16 will take place on March 28th and 29th this year, with the Elite Eight right after March 30th and 31st. The Final Four will take place on April 6th. The Final Four this year is in Phoenix, and the National Championship will take place on April 8th. Need to rewind, go back, put those in your calendar. I know anyone who's a teacher listening, call off school. You are not going to want to be at school when some of these great games are taking place at 12 o'clock. National Championship, April 8th. It's a Monday. It'll be late at night, probably 9 o'clock. It'll be a fun one in Phoenix. So let's take another quick little break. So I want to talk to you about another one of our sponsors. Let's talk about eBay. The weather's starting to get warm. As we mentioned, it is time for golf season. What better way to start off golf season than with brand new equipment? Go do it. Go spend that money. Go buy brand new equipment. But don't spend as much money as you think, because I can get you 50% off on all golf equipment with eBay. Up to 50% off all golf equipment on eBay. Don't miss out on this deal. Check out the link in the description to get up to 50% off. Once again, link in description, eBay. Up to 50% off on golf equipment. Let's move into some of the conference outlooks as of right now. Now, KenPom, if you don't have a KenPom site, I have the subscription. I paid money for the subscription. They rank the conferences in order from best to worst. So we're going to talk about some of the top 8 or 9 conferences. The best conference is without a doubt the Big 12. So we're just going to talk a little bit about who has a chance of winning a conference title, regular season conference title. So we'll talk about some of the top 3, top 4 teams who really have a chance. So let's start with the Big 12. Your Big 12 champion, I think, will be Houston. They're currently in first. They're 10-3. Iowa State right behind them at 9-4, and then Kansas, Baylor, and Texas Tech are all 8-5. Texas Tech, yes, having a great season this year. The Big East, UConn is in full control at 14-2. Marquette right behind them at 10-4. Creighton behind at 11-5. Seton Hall 10-5. Yes, Seton Hall having a good year. The Big Ten, Purdue is in full control, 12-3, even with that loss at Ohio State the other day. Illinois is in second at 10-4, with Wisconsin in third at 10-6. The SEC is the one that is up for grabs probably the most. Alabama in first at 10-2. Tennessee 10-3. Auburn and South Carolina are 9-4. Moving into the ACC, we talked about a little bit how it's UNC and Duke. How exciting that is. North Carolina 12-3, Duke 11-3, Virginia 11-5. Into the Pac-12, Arizona 11-3. And what if I told you it is Washington State in second, 11-4. Incredible stuff. Kyle Smith, coach over there, and doing an incredible job. Washington State 11-4. Oregon is in third at 9-5, 2 games back. Now, if you don't know, the Mountain West is incredibly entertaining this year. They got probably 6 teams that are going to end up being in March Madness. The Mountain West is doing great for themselves. Utah State is in first at 10-4. Boise State is behind at 9-4, and then San Diego State is 9-5, a game behind. Now the A10 is next. Dayton and Loyola Chicago, Sister Jean 11-2. They're tied for first. Richmond right behind them at 10-2. Into the American Athletic Conference. USF 12-1. Believe it or not, USF, they got a coach named Amir Abdul-Rahim. He took Kennesaw State to the tournament last year. USF is in first in the AAC. Now, I've got a lot of questions on, is USF a legit at-large contender, and they are not. They're like 92nd in the net. Strength of record's like 67th. They're not. They're going to have to win their tournament, but hey, a regular season tournament, or a regular season championship would be incredibly impressive, especially for a first-year coach. In second is Charlotte, 11-2. Third is FAU, Florida Atlantic, and SMU are 10-3. Conference kind of up for grabs a little bit still. Now let's move on to our bracketology. Just talk about our bracketology here a little bit. So we already mentioned the 1 seeds. It is still the same. It is Purdue, it is UConn, it is Houston, it is Arizona. 2 seeds are still the same. We kept them all the same. Now, there have been some movement. Creighton, as we mentioned, moved into the 3 seed. But what we want to talk about is some of our bubble watch. So let's start from about let's start from the 10 seeds and on. So our 10 seeds, as we mentioned, we already mentioned Gonzaga. We do have Nevada, Mississippi State, and Providence as our other 3 10 seeds. The 11 seeds, we have Nebraska as our last bye. Nebraska is our last bye in. And then the first 4, we have Boise State, Seton Hall, Utah, and Villanova. Villanova is our last team in total. Now, the teams that just barely missed the cut, we have Ole Miss, Chris Beard squad, Cincinnati, Texas A&M, and Wake Forest. The next 4 out, Butler, Thad Matta squad, Indiana State, Colorado, and Princeton. Yes, Princeton. Those are that's some of our bubble watch. Now we post our bubble all over the place. We'll post it on Twitter. We'll post it on Instagram. We even post it on our TikTok. That's Bracket Science, 2 S's. Go check those out. Fully encourage everyone to go check those out, as we post them just. We posted 2 this past week of bracketology. So if you want to see where your team stands, really encourage you to go check those out. That's going to do it for us today. That's the end of the show. That's our March Madness recap. As always, while you're here, please like and subscribe, whether you're on video, whether you're on audio. Hopefully you're looking at my pretty face on video, but we also appreciate all the listeners on Spotify or Apple. I'm going to mention it again. Go follow us, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Bracket Science. Science has 2 S's at the beginning of it. We post everything on there. You're going to want to see all the games, all the results, so you don't have to watch all the games. We'll update you on what is happening. Hit the notification so you're updated on all the big games. Whenever a top 10 team loses, we always post about it. We always post our graphic. We really appreciate all of you for tuning in. Hit that like button. Have a great rest of the week. See you later.